The blood on my hands had already dried when the police officers broke down the door. I was sitting on the kitchen floor, back against the wall, looking at that woman lying in front of me, the broken broomstick beside her. The silence was deafening after so many years of hearing her screams, her insults, the sound of beatings. For the first time in 17 years, I could breathe without feeling fear, but the smell of urine and feces mixed with blood made me nauseous. I had shoved that broomstick handle where the sun doesn't shine with all the force my muscles allowed. The same broomstick she used to beat me, the same one she'd jam into my stomach when I cried from hunger, the same one she'd break on my back when I didn't clean the house the way she wanted. My arms were trembling, not from regret, but from an exhaustion that came from much deeper than the body. It was as if all the accumulated rage of a lifetime had been discharged in those minutes. She was still breathing, making sounds I'd never heard coming from her mouth. Sounds of pain, real pain. The same pain she caused me for years and years, without ever showing a hint of remorse. The police officers were shouting something, but I couldn't process the words. I just saw their mouths moving while they pointed guns at me. I raised my hand slowly, still dirty. One of them approached her, checked her pulse, shouted for an ambulance. The other handcuffed me so hard I felt my wrists crack. But I felt no pain, not anymore, because for the first time in my life I had been stronger than her. My name is Michael. I'm 25 years old, and I'm writing this from inside the Kern County Regional Correctional Facility in California. I was sentenced to 8 years in prison for attempted murder and torture. I've already served 2 years and 4 months. My lawyer is fighting to reduce my sentence, arguing self-defense and extreme mitigating circumstances, but the process is tangled in the American judicial system, which moves at the speed of a stuck turtle. Meanwhile, I wake up every day at 5 a.m. to the sound of the siren, eat food that looks like dog chow, share a cell with 6 other men, and try not to think too much about what I did. People who know my case have 2 reactions. Either they look at me like I'm a monster, or they look at me with pity that's almost worse than hate. Nobody wants to hear the whole story. Nobody wants to know what an 8-year-old child goes through when he's beaten every day by the person who should care for him. Nobody wants to imagine what it's like to grow up in a personal hell where the torturer sleeps in the next room. That's why I'm telling it here. Because you who are watching don't know me, don't have formed prejudices, and maybe, just maybe, you can understand that not everything in life is black or white. I seriously hurt my grandmother, in a way that makes me nauseous when I remember. But before you judge me, before you close this video and call me a monster in the comments, I ask one thing. Listen to my story until the end. All of it. Because what appeared in the newspapers, what the prosecutor said in court, what the neighbors commented in interviews, none of that tells even 10% of what really happened inside that house. The irony of all this is that the police officer who arrested me, a big, strong guy with over 15 years on the force, broke down crying when he learned details of what I'd been through. He told me this 2 days later, when he came to visit me at the station before I was transferred here. "Kid," he said with a choked voice, "I've seen a lot of shit in this profession, but what you endured, I don't know if I wouldn't have done worse." That broke me more than the judge's sentence. Today, when I look back at that 8-year-old boy who arrived at his grandmother's house, thinking he'd finally have a family, a home, security, I feel a pain in my chest that doesn't go away, because that boy died long before the day I picked up that broomstick. He died little by little with each punch, each cruel word, each hungry night, each humiliation. What's left is this: a 25-year-old guy who sleeps on a concrete bed and wonders every day if it was worth it. So, if you're really paying attention to my story, if you can feel even a little of what I'm trying to convey here, I need you to do one thing for me. Like this video now. Subscribe to the Traumatic Accounts channel. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any story, and tell me in the comments where you're watching this from. Your city, your state, your country. This helps me know that there are people on the other side really listening, really caring, and helps me continue telling what needs to be told. Because I promise you, what's coming ahead will explain a lot, will make you understand how an innocent child transforms into someone capable of such a brutal act. It will show that sometimes monsters aren't born. They're created, molded, sculpted by the cruelty of those who should protect. My story isn't pretty, doesn't have a happy ending, but it's real. And maybe it's important that it be told, even if only so that other children don't go through what I went through, so that other adults recognize the signs, so that society stops closing its eyes to what happens inside houses, behind locked doors, far from the eyes of those who could help. So take a deep breath, because from now on I'm going to take you back. Back to 2007, when it all began. Back to that house in the outskirts of Bakersfield, California, which became my personal hell. Back to the eyes of that 8-year-old boy who still believed that adults were trustworthy, that family meant love, and that grandma was synonymous with affection and warm cookies. What ridiculous innocence. My mother's name was Danielle. She was 19 years old when I was born, in 1999, at Kern Medical Center in Bakersfield. My father, a guy I never knew and whose name I'm not even sure of, disappeared when he found out about the pregnancy. Typical, right? But my mother, at least in the first years, tried. She really tried to be a good mother within the limitations she had. We lived in a tiny apartment in East Bakersfield, 2 poorly divided rooms where the smell of mold competed with the smell of the food she made when she had money. My mother worked as a cashier at a supermarket, pulled double shifts when she could, and I stayed with a neighbor during the day. Mrs. Garcia, a fat and friendly lady who gave me saltine crackers and let me watch cartoons on her TV. I remember some good things from that time. I remember my mother coming home tired from work, but still finding energy to bathe me, put me to sleep, telling made-up stories about pirates and treasures. I remember her singing while cooking on weekends, country songs that played on the old kitchen radio. I remember the smell of the cheap perfume she wore, something sweet that stuck to my clothes when she hugged me. But life is a bitch, and good things never last long for poor people. In 2006, when I was 7 years old, my mother started getting sick. At first it was just headaches, excessive tiredness, things she attributed to overwork, but it got worse. She started fainting, having constant fever, losing weight in a scary way. When she finally got an appointment with Medicaid, after months on the waiting list, they discovered cancer. Acute myeloid leukemia, the doctor said with that professional coldness that only those who work with death every day can have. Treatment began, but it was brutal. Chemotherapy that left my mother so weak she could barely get out of bed. All her hair fell out. She started looking like a ghost, yellowish skin, sunken eyes. I was 7 years old and saw my mother wasting away in front of me without really understanding what was happening. I only knew she couldn't work anymore, that the money was gone, that Mrs. Garcia couldn't take care of me for free anymore. That's when my paternal grandmother appeared. Yes, paternal. The mother of the guy who abandoned me before I was even born. Her name was Nancy, and she lived in her own house in the Oildale neighborhood, a somewhat distant but structured neighborhood. She was in her early 60s at the time, was a widow, received a pension from her deceased husband that allowed her to live reasonably well. When my mother became too sick to care for me, it was the hospital social worker who located my grandmother. She was my only living relative besides my mother. The social worker explained the situation. A 7-year-old child, mother with terminal cancer, unable to care for her son, no money, no support. My grandmother agreed to take me in temporarily, until my mother recovered. I remember perfectly the day I went to live with her. It was March 2007, autumn beginning, the leaves on the trees already turning yellow. My mother hugged me at the hospital door with a strength I didn't know she still had. Told me it was just for a few months, that soon she'd get better and come get me. She was lying, and I think we both knew it. But it was a necessary lie. A lie that allowed us to say goodbye without completely falling apart. Grandma Nancy's house was on a quiet street, simple but well-kept houses, iron gates, small gardens. Hers was painted beige with brown details. It had a garage she didn't use because she didn't have a car and a backyard with some chickens. From the outside, it looked like the kind of place where a child would have a happy childhood. In the first few days, she was even tolerable. Not affectionate, not loving, but tolerable. She showed me the room where I'd sleep, a small room in the back with a single bed, an old wardrobe, and a window overlooking the yard. Told me the house rules. Wake up early, don't make a mess, don't make noise, help with chores, normal rules. I thought at the time, but there was something in the way she looked at me, something cold, distant, almost hostile, as if my presence there was an unbearable burden, a favor she was doing against her will. I was the living reminder of the son who had disappointed her, who had gotten a girl pregnant and fled from responsibility. I carried his last name, had his face, and that was unforgivable in her eyes. The public school where I was enrolled was about a 15-minute walk away. Second grade, Mrs. Martinez, a young and patient woman who tried to teach a bunch of noisy children to read and write. I was shy, quiet, still processing the separation from my mother. The other boys thought I was weird, didn't call me to play ball at recess. I'd sit alone near the fence, looking at the street, imagining if my mother was okay, if she missed me, if she was really going to come get me. The first few weeks at Grandma Nancy's house were adaptation. She worked part-time as a cleaner at a private school, left early, and came back in the early afternoon. When she was home, she'd stay in the living room watching her soap operas or in the kitchen preparing meals in silence. We barely talked. I tried to be invisible, do everything right, not cause trouble, but the change began subtly. First came the comments. "You eat like a pig, just like your father." "Stop making that noise, you insufferable brat. Look at this mess you left on the floor. You're good for nothing." Words that cut deeper than any slap. Then came disproportionate punishments. I left a glass in the sink. I'd go without dinner. I forgot to take out the trash. I'd get beaten with the belt. I got a below-average grade at school. I'd be locked in the dark room for hours. Every mistake, every slip, every imperfection was reason for punishment. I tried to call my mother whenever I could, from the payphone on the corner with coins I borrowed from neighbors, but she was getting worse and worse, her voice weaker and weaker, words harder and harder to form. She told me to be strong, to obey Grandma, to study hard. I never complained about what I was going through. Didn't want to worry her. Didn't want to be one more burden in her life, which was already hanging by a thread. My grandmother found out about the calls, caught me at the payphone one day, dragged me home by my hair while I screamed. That night, she beat me with a broomstick handle until my arms were purple. "Your mother doesn't want anything to do with you anymore. She spat while hitting me. She dumped you here and left. You're a burden, a weight, a mistake, and now you're my problem." I was 8 years old. 8 years old. And I was learning that not all adults are trustworthy, that not all family is synonymous with love, and that some people carry so much bitterness inside them that they can only live by taking it out on the weakest. School life began to reflect what was happening at home. My grades dropped. I'd arrive with purple marks on my arms, on my face. Sometimes Mrs. Martinez noticed, called me a few times to talk after class. "Michael, is everything okay at home? How did you get these marks?" I lied. I always lied, said I had fallen, that I had hit the door, that I had fought with boys on the street, lies that nobody really believed, but that everyone accepted because it was easier than investigating. There was one teacher who didn't accept it. The physical education teacher, a woman named Andrea, tall, strong, who wasn't afraid to confront anyone. She saw the marks on my back during a class on the court, marks that my shirt couldn't completely hide. She took me to the principal's office, tried to talk to me gently, but I was too terrified to tell the truth. The principal called my grandmother to school. I'll never forget that day. My grandmother arrived all composed, with that fake little smile, speaking softly with the teachers, explaining that I was a difficult child, traumatized by my mother's illness, that I made up stories, that I hurt myself on purpose to get attention. She was convincing, very convincing, and I was just an 8-year-old child, silent, scared, not knowing how to ask for help. When we got home that day, she beat me with a fury I'd never seen, not just with the broomstick, but with her hands, her feet, whatever was within reach. She called me a snitch, a traitor, a worm. Told me that if I told anything to anyone again, she'd kill me and say it was an accident. And I believed it because deep in her eyes, I saw she was capable. It was around this time, a few months after I went to live with her, that my mother died. Leukemia 1. She was 24 years old, a whole life ahead of her, which was stolen by sick cells. The social worker called my grandmother, gave her the news. I was at school when it happened. When I got home, my grandmother was sitting in the living room watching the soap opera as if nothing had happened. "Your mother died," she said, without taking her eyes off the TV. "The funeral is tomorrow morning." That's all. Just that. As if she were commenting that it had rained or that the beans had burned. I stood there, backpack on my shoulders, processing those 3 words. My mother died. The only person in the world who truly loved me, who looked at me with affection, who made me feel that I mattered, had gone away forever. I didn't cry right away. I think my brain was still trying to understand, trying to believe. I went to my room, sat on the bed, looked out the window at the chickens in the yard scratching the dirt, and then, finally, it hit me. It hit with such weight that my chest physically hurt. I cried all night in silence, with my face buried in the pillow so my grandmother wouldn't hear. I cried for my mother, for the childhood I wasn't going to have, for the life that could have been different. I cried because at 8 years old I had just become an orphan and was trapped with a woman who hated me. The funeral was the next day at a public cemetery full of cramped graves. There were few people. Me, my grandmother, the social worker, Mrs. Garcia, who was my mother's neighbor, and 2 or 3 other people I didn't know. The coffin was simple, cheap, provided by the county. My mother was inside, but I couldn't bring myself to get close to see. Couldn't say goodbye properly. The social worker tried to talk to me after the ceremony, asked if everything was okay, if my grandmother was taking good care of me. My grandmother answered for me, said everything was great, that I was a blessed child to have such a dedicated grandmother. The social worker wrote something on her clipboard, said she'd make periodic visits to check on my well-being. Those visits never happened. The system was too overloaded, with too many cases, too many children at risk. I was just another number, another file, another child who had lost his mother and was in the care of a relative. Nothing extraordinary, nothing that deserved special attention. And that's how I got trapped. Trapped with a woman who saw in me only the reflection of a son who disappointed her. Trapped with nowhere to run, no one to protect me, no voice to cry out for help that anyone would really hear. The house on the quiet street with the small garden and the chickens in the yard became my personal prison. And my grandmother, the guardian of this prison, was just beginning to show what she was really capable of. After my mother's death, something broke completely inside my grandmother. Or maybe she just felt that now she could do whatever she wanted without fear of consequences. There was no one left to protect me, no one who would check on how I was. I was officially hers, her legal ward, her responsibility that she never wanted. The routine that was established in the following months was mechanical and brutal. I'd wake up at 5:30 a.m., same time as her. I had to prepare my own breakfast, bread with margarine if there was any. She'd have breakfast alone in the living room, watching the morning news while I ate standing in the kitchen. Then I had to clean everything, wash the dishes, sweep the floor. All this before 7, when I had to be ready to go to school. School became my only refuge, the only place where I didn't feel constant fear. But it was hard to concentrate in class when I barely slept, when my stomach growled from hunger, when the marks on my body hurt every time I moved. My grades plummeted. From a mediocre student, I became one of the worst in the class. Mrs. Martinez tried to help as best she could. She'd give me extra snacks secretly, pretended not to see when I dozed off during class, let me stay in the library during recess when the other boys mocked me. But she couldn't do much more than that. She had a classroom with 32 students, all with their own problems. When I returned from school at 11:30, my grandmother was already home, and that's when daily hell began. She'd inspect the entire house, looking for anything out of place, any sign of neglect. And she always found something, always. A strand of hair on the bathroom floor, a poorly washed spoon in the dish rack, a fingerprint on the mirror. Anything served as an excuse. The punishments were creative and cruel. Sometimes, she'd make me kneel on top of rice grains for hours until my knees bled. Other times, she'd lock me in the storage closet in the back of the house, a dark cubicle full of cockroaches and spider webs, where I'd be terrified hearing strange noises. There were days she'd simply beat me with whatever was at hand. Flip-flop, belt, the blessed broomstick that would become my weapon years later. But the worst wasn't the physical violence, it was the psychological, the words she spat with visceral hatred. "You should have died along with that slut of your mother." Your father was right to run away. Who would want an abortion like you? Look at you. Weak, stupid, useless, good for nothing. I should hand you over to an orphanage, but not even they would want trash like you. Words that pierce deeper than any punch. Words I was beginning to believe. Because when you hear the same thing every day, your mind starts to accept it as truth. I was 9 years old when I tried to run away for the first time. It was on a Saturday morning, after she had beaten me the night before, because I had forgotten to close the gate properly. I waited for her to leave for the market, stuffed some clothes in a bag, took the few coins I had saved, and started walking. Had no plan, had nowhere to go, just wanted to be away from there. I walked through the neighborhood streets, then through downtown, watching people pass by in a hurry, each with their lives, their problems. Nobody noticed a dirty, skinny 9-year-old boy with a bag on his back. By afternoon, I was hungry and cold. Bakersfield in June can get chilly at night, and I only had a thin sweater. I sat in the park near St. Francis Church, shivering, not knowing what to do. That's when a security guard approached, asked if I was lost. I tried to make up a story, but he didn't believe it. He took me to the police station. They called my grandmother. She arrived making a scene, crying false tears, saying she was desperate, that I had run away after a simple scolding. The police officers believed her, of course. She was a lady in her early 60s, fragile appearance, tearful voice. I was a 9-year-old kid with a history of making up stories. According to her, she had already spread it at school and in the neighborhood. What happened when we got home? I prefer not to detail. It was the worst beating of my life up to that point. She beat me until I passed out. I woke up on my bedroom floor, body all sore, dried blood on my face, and learned my lesson. There was no escape. The neighbors knew. It's impossible that they didn't know. The house walls were thin. My screams certainly went through, but nobody did anything. There was Mrs. Johnson on the left side, a retired lady who pretended not to hear. Mr. Williams on the right side, a truck driver who was always traveling, the family across the street who averted their eyes when they passed by me. Once Mrs. Johnson even commented to my grandmother. I heard by chance, "Nancy, that boy of yours is very quiet, very sad. Is everything okay with him?" And my grandmother with that fake smile of hers. "Oh, Irene, you know how these kids are today. He misses his mother a lot, gets a bit depressed sometimes, but I take good care of him, you can be sure." Lies wrapped in fake concern. And Mrs. Johnson accepted that answer. She went back to her house and continued pretending she didn't hear the screams. When I was 10 years old, I started 4th grade. New teacher, new class, renewed hope that maybe someone would notice, someone would help. The teacher's name was Robert. He was young, recently graduated, full of ideas about inclusive education and student attention. He noticed. Of course he noticed. I was the child who was always in dirty clothes, who stank. Because my grandmother only let me shower once a week to save water, she said that had visible marks all over my body, who never brought adequate school supplies. Teacher Robert tried. He really tried. He'd call me after class to talk, tried to gain my trust, offered help in a gentle and non-threatening way, but I was too afraid to speak. Afraid of what my grandmother would do if she found out. Afraid of being called a liar again, afraid of ending up somewhere worse. Until one day, Teacher Robert went further. He called Child Protective Services, made a formal complaint. 2 CPS workers showed up at school, talked to me in a separate room, a woman and a man, both with serious expressions, but trying to seem friendly. I told them, for the first time, I told them everything. The beatings, the punishments, the hunger, the insults, the constant fear. I cried while I spoke, years of pain coming out in stumbling words. They wrote everything down, asked questions, asked for details. "You're being very brave," the counselor said. "We're going to solve this. You can trust us." They went to my grandmother's house the next day. Did an inspection, talked to her, to the neighbors, took pictures of my room. My grandmother denied everything, obviously. Said I was problematic, that I made up stories to get attention, that she did the best she could with a difficult child she had inherited from an irresponsible son. The neighbors saw nothing, heard nothing, knew nothing. My grandmother was such a dedicated, kind lady for taking care of that complicated boy. Teacher Robert was called meddlesome, someone who was creating problems where there were none. The school principal, pressured by the school district, asked him to focus on pedagogy and not on family matters. In the end, nothing happened. The case was filed as unfounded suspicion. I continued in the same house, with the same grandmother, in the same hell. And what she did to me after that complaint was worse than anything that had come before. She beat me for 3 days straight, not all at once, but in sessions. In the morning before school, in the afternoon when I came back, at night before sleeping, she'd beat until she got tired, leave me on the floor, bleeding and crying. Then she'd come back hours later and beat again. You wanted to get attention? She'd scream while the belt cut my skin. Now you have my attention, all of it. I locked my bedroom door from the inside. On that third day, I pushed the wardrobe to block the entrance. She pounded on the door, screamed that she was going to kill me, that she was going to break me completely. I cowered in the corner of the room, hugging my knees, praying to a higher power I didn't believe in that this would end. Eventually, she got tired, left. I stayed there all night without eating, without sleeping, just waiting for the next round. In the morning, she acted as if nothing had happened, made coffee, ate her bread, watched the news, didn't talk to me, didn't acknowledge my existence. And that silence was almost worse than the violence, because it meant she was planning something. The punishment came differently after that. She started systematically depriving me of food, not obviously, but calculated. Breakfast, only when she decided. Lunch sometimes there was, sometimes not. Dinner rarely. I started stealing food at school. I'd take snacks from other kids' lunchboxes when they weren't looking. I'd eat the leftovers I found in the cafeteria trash. Once I ate a sandwich that had fallen on the floor and been there for hours, covered in dirt. I didn't care. Hunger was worse than disgust. My body started showing the effects. I became skeletal, ribs marking on thin skin. My teeth started to yellow and fall out from lack of nutrients. My hair became thin, dull. I looked like a concentration camp child, but nobody seemed to really see. They heard and chose to ignore, which may be worse. At 11 years old, I was smaller than all the children my age, weaker, more fragile, more broken. The boys at school had stopped mocking me. I think they realized there was something really wrong, and that scared even the bullies. I became invisible, a ghost walking the hallways. It was around this time that I started having bad thoughts. Thoughts about ending it all, about jumping from the second-floor window of the school, about taking the pills my grandmother took for blood pressure and swallowing them all at once. Thoughts of an 11-year-old child who was already tired of living. One night I almost did it. I had a kitchen knife in my room, the blade pressed against my wrist, trying to gather courage, but I was too cowardly even for that. Or maybe something inside me, some stupid survival instinct. Still thought things could get better. They didn't get better. When I was 12 years old, my grandmother started a new form of torture. She made me work. Not normal household chores, but heavy labor. I'd carry cement bags for her. She had started doing odd jobs selling construction materials. I'd clean neighbors' yards for crumbs she'd pocket. I'd paint walls under the scorching sun. If I complained about tiredness, pain, anything, she'd beat me. If I took too long on a task, she'd beat me. If I did it too fast and she thought it was poorly done, she'd beat me. There was no right way to do things. And the broomstick, that damn wooden broomstick she loved to use. She'd hit my back, my arms, my legs, beat until the handle cracked, until I couldn't stand anymore. Then she'd buy another and start over. I developed a technique of shutting down during beatings. My mind would go somewhere else while my body received the blows. I'd imagine I was somewhere else. Another life. I'd imagine my mother hadn't died, that we had run away far away, that we were happy in a place where nobody hurt us. But these fantasies only lasted as long as the beating lasted. Then I'd return to reality. Sore body, blood dripping, alone in the dark room. At 13 years old, adolescence beginning, hormones doing their thing, I started to feel anger. Not just sadness, not just fear, but real hot anger. Anger at my grandmother, anger at my father who abandoned me, anger at my mother who died and left me there, anger at the world that saw my suffering and did nothing. I started to respond. Small rebellions that cost dearly, but that I couldn't control. When she insulted me, I'd insult back. When she ordered me to do something, I'd delay on purpose. When she hit me, I'd look into her eyes with hate instead of fear. This only made things worse. She increased the intensity, the frequency, the cruelty. That's when she started humiliating me sexually. Not direct sexual abuse, she didn't touch me that way, but humiliation, which was almost as traumatizing. She'd make me take off my clothes and stand naked in the yard while she watered the plants, laughing at my shame. She'd make me sleep without clothes when it was cold, saying I didn't deserve blankets. She'd make disgusting comments about my changing body, about hair growing, about my voice getting deeper. "You're becoming a man just like your father. Useless," she'd say with disgust. Another worm in the world. I died of shame, anger, helplessness. It was a different violation, but just as destructive as any other form of abuse. At 14 years old, I was a broken shell of a human being. Had no friends, had no family, except for her who was worse than having nobody, had no future prospects. School had given up on me. I had failed twice and was years behind boys my age. Teachers saw me as a lost cause. I thought about running away again, but I was older now and knew the police would find me and bring me back. I thought about killing myself, but that stubborn spark of survival still hadn't completely gone out. So I just existed like a zombie, going from home to school and from school to home, getting beaten, going hungry, accumulating scars on the outside and inside. It was at 15 years old that something started to change in me. Not a good change, but a change. I started to see my grandmother not as an impossible force of nature to fight, but as an old woman who was getting weaker, slower, more vulnerable. I was growing, getting taller, even malnourished, getting stronger, even beaten regularly, and she was aging, getting more fragile, her blows losing strength. I started having revenge fantasies, increasingly elaborate, more violent fantasies. I'd imagine turning the tables, being the one who beat her, being the one who humiliated her, being the one who made her feel all the pain she caused me. These thoughts scared me, but also gave me a strange sense of power, possibility, that maybe one day I wouldn't have to be the victim anymore. At 16 years old, I was 5'8", skinny as a stick, but taller. She was about 70 years old, arthritis, high blood pressure, a bad knee. Physically, I could dominate her if I wanted, but I was still afraid. Not rational fear, but visceral fear, planted by years of conditioning. She was still the authority, the adult, the one in charge. And I was still the mistreated child, broken, conditioned to obey and take beatings, until one day something broke. I was 17 years old. It was February 2017, infernal summer heat, that kind of humid heat that sticks to your skin and makes everyone irritated. I had spent the whole day cleaning a client's house of hers, scrubbing floors, washing bathrooms, carrying trash. I came home at 6 p.m., exhausted, sweaty, hungry. She was in the kitchen preparing her dinner. Roast chicken with potatoes, the smell making me salivate. I asked if there was food for me. "There's old rice and beans in that pot," she said without looking at me. I looked at the pot. 3-day-old rice, hard and dried out, sour beans which had already formed a strange layer on top while she ate fresh chicken. Something in me broke. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was like some rope that was stretched too tight finally snapped. "I'm not eating that," I said. My voice came out firmer than normal. She turned to me, eyes wide, not because of the refusal, but because of my posture. For the first time in almost 10 years, I was standing, looking down at her, not hunched or cowering. "What did you say?" I said, "I'm not eating that crap. You're eating fresh food. I worked all day. I want real food." She grabbed the broomstick that was leaning against the wall. That broomstick? Her torture companion for years came at me to hit me as she always did. But this time I held the handle, grabbed it before she hit me. We were there in a stupid tug of war, she trying to pull the broomstick back, me holding tight, and I saw in her eyes. I saw when she realized I was stronger than her. Realized the dynamic had changed. Realized, maybe for the first time, that she should be afraid of me. I pulled the broomstick from her hands. It was easy, frighteningly easy. I held the broomstick, looking at her, feeling years of anger boiling in my veins. I could beat her now. Could make her feel a fraction of what I felt, but I didn't do it. Not that day, not yet. I broke the broomstick in half with my knee and threw the pieces in the trash. Then I left the house, walked down the street until I calmed down. I came back hours later. She was locked in her room, didn't come out for dinner, didn't come to beat me during the night. Something had changed irreversibly, and in the following years, this change would only grow until it exploded in a way neither of us expected. After that day when I broke the broomstick, there was a strange truce in the house. Not peace. There was never peace there, but a kind of tense balance. My grandmother realized she could no longer physically dominate me like before. I realized I had power now, but didn't quite know what to do with it. During the following months, from February to October 2017, she changed tactics. Less direct physical violence, more psychological control. She threatened to call the police if I didn't obey. Said she'd kick me out of the house and I'd become homeless. Swore she'd tell everyone I was violent, that I had tried to assault her, that I was dangerous, and the shittiest part, she'd probably be believed. A 70-year-old lady versus a 17-year-old teenager with a history of behavioral problems wasn't even a competition, but I was changing inside. Years of compressed anger were finding outlets. I started screaming back when she insulted me. I'd slam doors when I left the room. I'd look at her with such pure hatred that I saw fear in her eyes. And that fear of hers fed me. It was like a drug to know that finally, she felt a little bit of the terror she made me feel for years. I turned 18 in May 2017, legal adulthood. Nobody celebrated, nobody said congratulations, nobody cared, but for me, it meant something. Technically, I could leave there. Had no money, had nowhere to go, had nothing, but legally she no longer had power over me. I stayed there because I had no option. Had dropped out of school a long time ago. Had no steady job, just odd jobs I did here and there. Had no documents because she controlled everything. Had no bank account. Had nothing in my name. I was still trapped, only now the chains were financial and practical instead of legal. In October of that year, I finally got a real job at a mechanic shop near the Greenfield area, on the other side of town. It wasn't anything glamorous. I cleaned the floor, organized tools, fetched parts, but it paid minimum wage, and the owner, Mr. Mario, was a decent guy. Mr. Mario was a short, fat man with huge hands, full of calluses and motor oil permanently under his nails. He didn't ask many questions, but saw the scars on my arms, the marks on my face, the way I cowered when someone raised their voice. "You running from something, kid?" he asked me on a rainy day while we had coffee during break. "From someone," I answered without thinking. He was quiet for a while, stirring the sugar in his coffee. "You got somewhere to stay?" "I do, but it's not a good place. If you need help, you talk to me, okay?" That broke me more than any beating. Genuine kindness from a stranger, when my own family never offered me anything but pain. I started saving money, not much, because my grandmother found out about the work and started demanding I give her half my salary. "Rent," she said. "You live in my house. You have to pay." But I hid a portion. I'd keep coins in places she didn't search, inside a sock stuffed in the back of the wardrobe, in a can buried in the yard, folded inside the pages of an old book. During these months, the dynamic between us was increasingly explosive. It was like those cartoons where two characters press an air pump until it explodes. The pressure only increased, and we both knew something was going to burst eventually. And it burst. It was on December 23rd, 2017, 2 days before Christmas. Not that we celebrated anything. Christmas at my grandmother's house was just another day, maybe with slightly better food if she was in a good mood. I had worked at the shop all day, a hot and suffocating Saturday. Mr. Mario had given me a Christmas bonus, $50 extra. It wasn't much, but for me it was a fortune. I was planning to use that money to finally get out of there, rent a room somewhere, start over. When I got home at 7 p.m., she was in the living room watching a soap opera, as always. I went straight to my room. I wanted to shower and rest. "Michael!" she shouted from the living room. I stopped in the hallway, sighed. What? Come here. I went back to the living room. She was standing now, holding something in her hand. My heart sank when I saw what it was, the envelope with the Christmas bonus I had hidden in the wardrobe. You were going to hide this from me? She said, voice low but trembling with anger. It's my money. I worked for it. You live in my house, eat my food, use my water, my electricity. This money is mine. You already keep half of what I earn. This is extra. I need it. You don't need shit. You're nothing. You have nothing. You are nothing. And as long as you're under my roof, everything you have is mine. She opened the envelope and took out the bills. $50 I had sweated to earn, $50 that represented my future freedom, and she simply stuffed it in the pocket of her dress. Something inside me cracked. Didn't break yet, but cracked. Give me that money back. Or what? She laughed. A cruel, mocking laugh. What are you gonna do, you piece of shit? You gonna cry? You gonna run and tell someone like you used to when you were little? Nobody cares about you. Nobody ever cared. Your mother didn't care. Your father didn't care. I don't care. You're a walking mistake I was forced to carry. I took a step towards her. I don't really know what I was planning to do, maybe just get the money back. But she interpreted it as a threat and did the worst thing she could have done. She grabbed the new broomstick she had bought. There was always a new broomstick, as if it were an extension of her, and came at me. You going to hit me now? You going to hit me, you worm? Come on then. And she hit me. The broomstick got my shoulder, my back, my arm when I tried to defend myself. It didn't hurt as much as it used to. She was weaker, and I was used to pain. But the humiliation, the injustice, the pure audacity of her still thinking she had the right to hit me after everything. It was too much. I ripped the broomstick from her hand, didn't pull, ripped with enough force for her to stagger backwards, and I saw again that fear in her eyes, that moment of, oh shit, I went too far. But this time I didn't stop. This time, years of anger found their release valve. I pushed her, not hard, but enough for her to fall on her butt on the floor. She screamed, tried to get up. I pushed her again, and she screamed, "You're crazy? I'm going to call the police. I'm going to report you." "Report what?" I screamed back. "Report that I finally defended myself, that I finally stopped being your punching bag?" She tried to crawl away, but I was blocking the way. And that's when I looked at the broomstick in my hand. That damn broomstick, that torture instrument she used on me for years. I broke it in half with my knee last time, but she bought another, always bought another. And something very dark whispered in my mind. Make her feel it. Make her feel everything you felt. I think it was at that moment that I crossed a line. A line that once crossed, there's no going back. I looked at her cowering on the floor. I looked at the broomstick and had an idea that disgusted me and thrilled me at the same time. "You know what you are?" I said, voice coming out strangely calm. "You're a rotten person, rotten inside. And you know where the rottenness is? In the anus. That's where the shit comes out. And you're shit." She didn't understand at first, but when I broke the broomstick, leaving just a large piece of handle with a cracked tip, when I approached her, she understood. "No." She started to cry. "No, Michael, please don't do this. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. Please, son. Please, son." She called me son. First time in 10 years. But it was too late for words, too late for pleas, too late for apologies that only came when she was afraid. I turned her face down. She fought, tried to crawl, but I was stronger, much stronger. I pulled up her skirt, pulled down her underwear, and shoved that broomstick handle where the sun doesn't shine. Her screams, I'll hear those screams until I die. They weren't normal screams, they were screams of pure pain, primitive, animal. Screams that made the neighbors turn on their lights, make noise on the other side of the walls. I pushed deep with force with all the anger I carried for a decade. I felt when something ruptured inside. I felt the warm blood start to drip down the wooden handle. And you know what I felt? Not satisfaction, not joy, but a kind of terrible relief, as if a demon inside me had finally been fed. I continued. Even when she stopped screaming and just started making guttural sounds. Even when I saw blood on the floor forming a puddle, even when I realized I was crying too. When I finally stopped, she was lying on the floor, motionless, except for convulsions. The broomstick handle was all bloody, the floor was bloody. I was bloody, and the silence was deafening. That's when I heard the siren approaching. Someone had called the police, probably several neighbors. I could have run. I still had time, but I didn't run. I simply sat there with my back against the kitchen wall, looking at her, waiting. The police broke down the door a few minutes later. 2 police officers entered with guns drawn, shouting commands. One of them came at me, handcuffed me hard enough to hurt. The other went to my grandmother, checked her pulse, started shouting on the radio, asking for an ambulance. Urgent. "What did you do, kid?" The officer who handcuffed me asked. He was a big, strong guy, deep voice. I looked at him. What I should have done 10 years ago. He lifted me from the floor, pushed me against the wall, searched my pockets, found the $50 bills I had taken back from my grandmother's dress during... "This is robbery too?" he asked. "No, it's mine." The ambulance arrived quickly. Paramedics rushed in, assessed my grandmother, started emergency procedures. I saw it all in glimpses as I was dragged out of the house. The whole street was awake, neighbors on sidewalks and windows looking. Mrs. Johnson with her hands on her face, shocked, Mr. Williams shaking his head, others I didn't really know commenting, judging, taking pictures with their cell phones. They threw me in the patrol car. The big officer got in the back seat with me. His partner drove. No siren now, just the tense silence of the trip to the station. "How old are you?" the officer asked. 18, turned in May. He sighed. "You just fucked up your whole life, kid." My life was already fucked. At the station, they put me in a cold room with no windows. They took off the handcuffs, gave me a glass of water. The detective on duty, a tired guy with a protruding belly, started asking me questions. Full name, date of birth, address, relationship with the victim. What happened? I told everything. Didn't summarize, didn't soften. I told about the 10 years of torture, the beatings, the hunger, and the humiliations. I told about the stolen money, the broomstick, the decision I made. The detective wrote everything down with a neutral expression. When I finished, he was quiet for a while, rereading the notes. "Can you prove all this you're saying?" "Scars all over my body. Medical records from school, if anyone looks. CPS complaint from 2010 that was filed. Teacher Robert, who tried to help me, can confirm." "And you decided to take justice into your own hands?" "I don't know if it was justice. I just know I couldn't take it anymore." They locked me in a temporary cell. There was nobody else there, which was a relief. I sat on a concrete bench, leaned my head against the wall, and finally let it all out. I cried. I cried for the 10 lost years. I cried for the child I was. I cried for the life I'll never have. I cried for the horrible act I committed. I cried until I had no more tears. 2 hours later, the big officer, the one who handcuffed me at the house, came to the cell, opened the door, came in, sat on the bench next to me. We stayed in silence for a while. "Your grandmother survived," he finally said. "She's in surgery now, serious injuries, but the doctors think she'll survive." I don't know if I was relieved or disappointed to hear that. I talked to CPS, found that 2010 complaint, found others 2 older ones that were never properly investigated. I called Teacher Robert. He confirmed everything you said. I looked at him. Tears were running down his face. "Kid," he said, voice choked. "I've been a cop for 15 years. I've seen a lot of shit. Saw people die, saw abused children, saw things that make me lose sleep. But what you went through, what you endured for 10 years while everyone closed their eyes?" He wiped the tears with the back of his hand. "I don't know if I wouldn't have done worse in your place. That broke me more than prison, more than handcuffs, more than anything. Seeing a veteran police officer cry for what I went through. I'm going to have to charge you," he continued. "It's my job. Attempted murder, aggravated assault, torture, but I'm going to write a detailed report about everything. I'll attach all the evidence I find and I'll testify in your favor, if needed. You deserve a chance, kid. You deserve real justice." His name was Officer Ronaldo, and he was the first person in years who looked at me and saw a human being instead of a problem. I spent that first night at the station awake, looking at the dirty ceiling of the cell. My mind couldn't properly process what had happened. My hands still trembled when I looked at them, even cleaned now of her blood. The next day, Sunday, Christmas Eve, they transferred me to the Kern County Provisional Prison. I was allocated in a cell with 12 other men, most much older than me. Drug dealers, thieves, a guy who had killed his wife. The environment smelled of sweat, piss, and despair. When the other prisoners asked what I had done, I told the summarized version. I hurt my grandmother. She tortured me for 10 years. I expected judgment, violence, rejection. Prison has a strange hierarchy about crimes. Certain things are forgivable, others aren't. But the reaction was different. One of the older guys, tattooed from head to toe, looked at me for a while. Crazy grandma is the worst thing you can imagine. He nodded. Had a stepfather like that. Beat me and my mom every day. I killed him when I was 22. I've been here for 8 years. And so, strangely, I gained a kind of respect. Not admiration for the act, but understanding. Most of those men had similar stories, fucked up childhoods, adults who failed them, violence generating violence. The first few months were adaptation. The brutal prison routine, wake up at 5, count, breakfast, which was basically dirty water with hard bread, back to the cell, sun time for 2 hours if you were lucky, lunch that may or may not have some protein, more time in the cell, dinner, lights out at 8. I learned the unwritten rules quickly. Don't talk to guards more than necessary. Don't accept favors that would have collection later. Keep your head down. Respect the hierarchy. Don't show weakness. My grandmother survived the surgery. Serious injuries to rectum and intestine, needed a temporary colostomy, was hospitalized for 3 weeks. When she was discharged, she went straight to the station to file formal charges against me. But something interesting happened during the investigation. Officer Ronaldo kept his word. He investigated thoroughly, talked to old neighbors, teachers, doctors, found school medical records showing recurring unexplained injuries, found teacher Robert's complaint, found witnesses who, now that I was no longer under her power, were willing to speak. Mrs. Johnson confessed she heard the screams, but was afraid to get involved. Mr. Williams admitted he saw the marks, but didn't know what to do. Even Mrs. Garcia, who took care of me when I was little, testified about how loving my mother was and how I changed after going to live with Grandma. Teacher Robert, now working at another school, came to the station to give detailed testimony about the complaint he made in 2010 and how it was covered up by the system. My public defender, a woman named Dr. Helena, was young but competent. She took all this material and built a defense based on psychological self-defense, years of systematic torture, and diminished capacity due to extreme trauma. The trial happened in August 2018, 8 months after the incident. I was 19 years old, still too thin, with deep dark circles from poorly slept nights in prison. The courtroom was full, curious journalists, my grandmother in a wheelchair. She insisted on being present, even with difficulty walking. The prosecutor, a middle-aged guy with a grumpy face, asked for 15 years for attempted murder and torture. Dr. Helena presented the defense, showed photos of my scars, medical records, filed complaints, called witnesses, Officer Ronaldo, Teacher Robert, the social worker who took me in when my mother died. Officer Ronaldo almost cried again on the stand, describing the state he found me in, the evidence of long-term abuse, the investigation that revealed years of torture. I believe Michael acted in desperation after a decade of being a victim, he said. Teacher Robert testified about the complaint he made, how it was ignored, how he saw me wasting away at school year after year. I failed that boy. The whole system failed him. My grandmother also testified. She denied everything, obviously. Said I was problematic, violent, that she did the best she could, that I made up stories. But her credibility was destroyed by the evidence. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the verdict was guilty of attempted murder with significant mitigating circumstances, innocent of torture. Ironically, since I had been tortured, not her. The sentence 8 years in prison in closed regime with possibility of progression to semi-open after serving 1/3. My grandmother fainted when she heard. She expected at least 15 years. The prosecutor turned red with anger, but the judge explained his decision. Considering the years of documented systematic abuse, the state's failure to protect a child clearly at risk, and the specific circumstances of the crime, I understand that a lesser sentence is appropriate. This young man deserves a chance to rebuild his life. And here I am, Kern County Regional Correctional Facility, 2 years and 4 months inside this cell. 5 years and 8 months remain. But Dr. Helena is working on appeals to reduce it even more, possibly convert to house arrest or semi-open. Life in prison is strange. It's not like they show in movies. It's more boring than anything else. Days drag on identically. Wake up, eat, exercise, cell, eat, cell, sleep. Weeks turn into months, turn into years without you really noticing. I share a cell now with 6 men after some transfers and reorganizations. There's Marcus in his 50s, arrested for trafficking. Juliano, 26, homicide in a bar fight. Rafael, 31, cargo theft. Evandro, 40, fraud. Bruno, 23, trafficking 2. And Caio, 19, same as I was when I came in, qualified theft. We created a dynamic. It's not exactly friendship, but it's companionship forced by circumstance. We share cigarettes. I don't smoke, but others do. Discuss football, tell stories from outside, complain about food, about guards, about unbearable heat in summer and cold in winter. I do work in prison to reduce the sentence. Every 3 days worked reduces 1 day of sentence. I work in the prison library, organizing books, helping other inmates with reading. It's quiet, keeps me busy, gives me access to books that make me forget where I am for a few hours. I've read more in the last 2 years than in my entire life. I read about history, philosophy, psychology. I read about trauma, about abuse, about cycles of violence. I read trying to understand not only what happened to me, but why it happened, how it could have been avoided. There's a book that marked me called The Body Keeps the Score. It talks about complex trauma, about how prolonged abuse changes the structure of the brain, especially in children. I read that book and cried because there it was scientifically explained what I felt. Why I had so much anger? Because I reacted explosively? Because my sense of danger was calibrated wrong. Understanding doesn't justify what I did, but it helps to process. I did therapy here too. The prison has a psychologist who comes twice a week, Dr. Patricia. She sees me individually once a week. At first I resisted, didn't want to talk, didn't trust, but gradually I started to open up. I told her things I never told anyone about the nightmares I still have where my grandmother is beating me and I'm little again, defenseless about the guilt I feel, not for the act itself, but for the part of me that felt pleasure during it, the fear that I'm a monster, that her violence transformed me into someone as sick as her. Michael, she told me in a session that marked me, you're not a monster. You're a traumatized person who reacted in the worst possible way in an impossible situation. That doesn't define you. What you do from here forward is what will define who you are. I want to believe her. Some days I can, others I look in the cracked mirror of the cell bathroom and see my father, a man who abandoned responsibilities and caused pain. I see my grandmother, someone capable of extreme cruelty, and I'm afraid of carrying that heritage in my blood. My grandmother had complications from the surgery a year after the trial. Serious infection, sepsis, multiple organs going into failure. She died in October 2019, alone in a public hospital. When Dr. Helena told me, I felt nothing, neither relief, nor sadness, nor guilt, just emptiness, as if she had already died to me a long time ago. She left nothing. The house was auctioned to pay medical debts, had no money, had no valuable goods. She was buried in a public cemetery in a common grave with nobody at the funeral. And you know what's most fucked up? A part of me feels sorry. Sorry for a woman so bitter, so full of anger, who didn't know how to do anything but take it out on an innocent boy. She lived 72 years and died hated, alone, without having experienced true love. What a waste of life. Sometimes I wonder what I would have done differently if I could go back in time. And the honest answer is, I don't know. I'd like to say I would have sought more help, that I would have run away earlier, that I would have found another way. But when you're a child in despair, when you're broken by years of abuse, when every door you knock closes in your face, logic doesn't work anymore. Only instinct remains, survival, accumulated anger looking for an outlet. So I did what I did, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life. Here inside, I have plans. When I get out, and I will get out eventually, I want to finish school. I want to take some technical course. I want to work, have my own place, live a normal life without violence. I want to try to build something from these ruins that remained from my childhood. Dr. Helena is optimistic. She thinks that with good behavior, work in prison, and the nature of the crime, I can get semi-open in 1 more year. Open regime after another 1.5 years. Conditional freedom before completing the entire sentence. I don't dare to hope. Hope has always been a double-edged sword in my life, cuts on the way there and back. But I wake up every day, I follow the routine, I read my books, I do my therapy, I work, I wait, because that's what survivors do, they survive. People who read my story will have opinions. Some will say I'm a victim, that I deserved acquittal, that justice should have been lighter. Others will say I'm a criminal, that violence is never the answer, that I deserved the maximum sentence. And both are right, in a way. I was a victim, and I am a criminal. Both things can be true at the same time. People aren't black or white. We're a confused gray trying to do the best we can with the shitty cards we were dealt. So, if you got this far, if you really cared enough to hear this whole story, I need one thing from you. If you felt anything while listening to me, anger, sadness, empathy, anything, like this video now, subscribe to the Traumatic Accounts channel, turn on the notification bell, and tell me in the comments what time it is where you are. What time is it while you reflect on this story of a boy who was broken and who broke someone back? I want to know that this story reached you, that you're thinking, reflecting, maybe even looking differently at that quiet child at school, that neighbor with strange marks, that relative who seems to have too much fear of an adult. Because if my story serves anything, let it be this, to open your eyes, to make you understand that monsters aren't born in laboratories. They're created in ordinary houses, on quiet streets, behind iron gates and closed curtains, and to remember that when a child asks for help, even silently, even through subtle signs, and is ignored, the consequences can be devastating for everyone involved. I don't know if what I did was right or wrong. I think it was simply human, flawed, imperfect, product of extreme circumstances. But I know one thing. I survived against all odds, with all the scars, despite everything. I'm still here. And as long as there's tomorrow, there's a chance to rebuild, to be more than my worst action, to be more than what they did to me. That's all I can ask for.